Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Rejuvi 45. This is our Rejuvi Venture channel, looking to build a community of practice with other modern leadership practitioners out there in the universe. So hope we've got some folks watching and following along in our conversation today. Joining me is Scott Goddard. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Scott is brand new to Rejuvi. He's the newest kid on our block, and we're super excited to have you.
Thanks so much, Mel. It's been a while since I've been called a kid. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. We got to keep supporting each other, right, as we age gracefully here.
That's correct.
Myself included. So Scott, you've been with us kind of unofficially for a couple of weeks, and you and I have been having some conversations about the risk that businesses face, and there's a lot of risk right now going on, right? There's so much complexity for a business leader trying to understand what's flying at them. We've got lots of stuff with the economy. We've got this emerging thing called AI and multimodal AI and all kinds of emerging technology. There's, talent shortage. There's all kinds of risks, to be had, no doubt, more complex than ever. And but one of the risks we've been chatting about is this idea of historically we've had leadership development done sort of independent of it in independent ways, right? Sort of the working on the people side, and then this idea of like, well, now we'll teach you some business practices. And there's some data to support that maybe that works in some cases, and there's probably some data to support that it really doesn't. So I'm looking forward to kind of peeling that onion with you this afternoon.
Very good.
So I would love to hear just a little bit, maybe you could share from your own career experience as you think about leadership development that you've had personally or that you've experienced, right, from others, and what that development kind of looked like for you.
Yeah, I think maybe for setting the stage, a good portion of my career has been spent in sales and sales operations, sales leadership, obviously as a part of that. And so that's certainly where my perspective comes from, probably primarily. Not that I haven't, participated in broader leadership development programs, et cetera, but they're always, that's always an overriding factor, right? Or has historically been an overriding factor. So, that said, one thing that I've experienced in business, and I think it's very common to feel like, well, we're a little different, or we're unique, we're the same, but however you want to characterize it.
Mhm.
But sales, in my experience, is one of those areas within business that tends to have a higher frequency of leadership change. And with leadership change, typically comes new methodology, new process, new development practices to, hand in hand with that.
Mhm.
So um, that's been an area of focus, a focus or experience for me, is that there is a lot of change, and sometimes it's pretty dynamic. So I agree with you. Um, you know, More often than not, they are siloed from other parts of the organization, leadership development programs, and also siloed from business development and business objectives. Right? They
Mhm.
tend to, and so in sales, you'll have individually focused development programs that don't always necessarily tie into the sales plans, the sales programs for the year, or even sometimes the multi-year programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't had as certainly a career in sales the way that you have, but I do recall one program that I saw they did a fairly decent job trying to connect, sort of running a business or running a franchise, right? Kind of a
Mhm.
distributed model at a former organization, and they were trying to use the key performance indicators of that sales franchise, that business, and talking about, how do you lead people, how do you do talent acquisition, right? Trying to teach things in some type of sequenced order so that, right, that franchise, and then of course, all of them, right, really could win and continue to move the needle. Um, you could measure some of that, right? You can measure, and of course with sales, what's the number one thing we care about?
Revenue.
Revenue, right? That's always top of mind. And there were some other counts like, well, have we hired in, new representatives? How many this year, right? How many have we lost? How are we expanding our territory, right? Those types of things. And then you could get some math behind it, right? Because some of those systems exist. What I noticed was missing, though, is if you think about somebody who is coming into a sales leader role, perhaps they were a really great salesperson, right? Sales professional, and they move into leadership. They're used to getting results themselves, right? And now they are in charge of actually growing more people like them, right? And they're in charge of being on the balcony and really watching the dance unfold and making sure everybody's supported and everybody knows the right moves and all of that good stuff. And so in that scenario, that individual's now needing to learn some different, more elevated skills, right, on the human side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, trying to figure out, how do I help now coach and equip these people to run their business practice in an effective way and coach them, right, to be the next leaders. That's a lot to try to figure out what order do you do that in, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in that, so certainly in that, I mean, that scenario, I guess I would probably call that like an organic growth, right? So someone evolving from within the organization into a leadership role. So they are already familiarized with and probably have had a hand in establishing and or curating the current model and the current practices, right? So there, um, while every this was part of what part of what I think I mentioned to you previously is every time a new leader comes in, they kind of want to put their own mark, right?
Mhm.
I think you characterized it as the flavor of the month, and
Mhm.
yes, sometimes flavors are very close, and sometimes they're dramatically different. But in this scenario, they're probably not changing things a lot, but they're still going to they're going to change some things up.
Mhm.
Um, and it may be based purely on personal experience. It might be, aspects of the program or the approach that they're bought into versus some that they're not as bought into. But if you stop and think about it, then there's also what I would call maybe the more inorganic type of change where someone's come in from the outside and there could be a wholesale, there could be like a brick wall almost put up and said, all right, stop in there. And here's the new process.
Mhm.
Um, to your point earlier, no organization is going to ignore the numbers, ignore the statistics. It's going to be, it's going to be driven by some of that information, but many times they're still dealing with static instances, of that data or that information. So the more that it can be um, dynamically driven and integrated into the kind of the fabric of the organization's goals and objectives, the better off I think, or the more smoothly that transition is going to occur. Did I help answer the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It just, you raised such a good point about when someone comes in from outside an organization, right? And oftentimes when you're hiring a leader, at a certain level, right? Maybe a more senior level, you're expecting someone to come in and bring some new practices, some fresh perspective. And, and they have a proven track record, right? Otherwise they wouldn't have
Mhm.
been hired to come into your organization. What we've seen happen though, and what you're talking about having experienced is that something gets rolled out or maybe rolled over, right? Salespeople in
Yeah.
particular, right? Like the boy, you guys get hit with different processes, compensation models, right? And it's just, I can imagine it's a little bit like whiplash. When I think about though what that does from an employee population, right? It's just this never-ending kind of waves of change to these different business practices in the hopes of getting right to better different results.
Hmm.
And you might still be able to measure to the same goals. We have revenue went up, revenue went down. There's still these other factors though, right? That it may be the new program or the new flavor, might have been a number of other things. So that speaks to all of the right intentions, right? For wanting to do something different or taking a risk and saying, hey, we need to change things up. We need a better rhythm. The challenge with that is if it's not connected to how to evolve yourself as a people leader, how to think about introducing change and transformation in an organization, right? Doing this with people, not to people.
Right.
And then connecting it to are we actually sequencing how fast we can go to make that type of change so that we can recognize, right, the goals that we set out to achieve. And so, up to this point, I would have to say, and in my own experience, just watching whether it's sales or other leadership groups, there hasn't been a very qualitative or maybe quantitative way to be able to understand if this, then that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do this in this order, then you can get to these results.
Yeah, I think that's certainly very true.
So again, we're all humans trying our best, right? And up to this point, when we think about developing leaders, there are a gajillion, and I mean that's a true number, a gajillion books written about leadership development. It's like a $1.23 trillion industry, right? Between leadership development programs, executive programs, books, coaches, training, right?
Right.
All of those things. And all well intended. But what I'm finding, and the reason why I came to Rejuvi, and I can't wait to hear kind of what your reason is. The reason I came is I recognized in myself as a leader as I made some of those tough transitions, right? From a manager role to a director role to a VP role, that sometimes I really understood like, oh, I need to be more strategic, right? I need to let go of the day-to-day stuff as I move into something new. What would have been helpful to me, though, is to know these are the new kind of competencies or attributes I need to start to embrace and learn more and do more of. But here's also the rhythm of how I operate my part of the business so that it's linked up with the rest of the rhythm of the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the business. It just didn't exist before. It was
Right.
sort of hey, we're rolling out continuous improvement. Go check that out. Now come back and figure out how to plug it into your job. Hey, we're rolling out strategic business planning. Now go back and figure out how that fits, in your part of the world. So there wasn't a rhythm to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect that's been a big struggle for a lot of people along the way.
It's very true, and I think that's a great point that ties back kind of to the example that I was making a little bit earlier about the a sales organizational change and process and methodology change. So many times, um, it may be a well practiced and well tried um, methodology in other organizations, other industries that maybe these new leaders came from, and so it's not that it's you know way out on the edge or what have you, or some some crazy concept, but many times it's still executed in the silo of the sales organization, not with consideration to um, you know service organization, customer service, customer success organizations, marketing, all these entities that are one step removed or one dot away from the sales organization in the in the matrix, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is and unfortunately historically those considerations come many times after the fact, or at a minimum after decisions have been made and maybe before execution has started, but we didn't really give consideration to the impact before the decision and the ball was rolling. The decision was made and the ball was rolling.
Right, right. We've talked about, in the past, change management being kind of a bolt on, right? Well,
Yep.
we're rolling this thing out and now we're just going to bolt on the people side of things. And
Yeah.
you know how well that works. To you're spot on, right? When you think about it's a system, it's not just one business area, right?
Yeah.
The tail wagging the dog. It's all gotta work together and it's all gotta find its rhythm. And, the beautiful thing, as we think about looking at evidence that shows the effectiveness of when you combine building the skills of that individual people leader, right, to be compassionate, to make good decisions, to have the attributes like having curiosity, have systems thinking mindset, understand the cultural context for what they're trying to achieve in the organization, and then getting the right people moving in the right direction. That's just one piece, right? That's the individual starting with that base of, this is kind of how I think about things and bring and take information in. Then it's sort of the how do I read what's going on around me? How do I figure out who I need to influence, bring along, help, support, etc.? What are all those other areas like what you pointed out? And then it's the how do I know how far and fast to go, right? With what we've got.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the way, how does this align now with the business, right? The business side of the growth model, which is strategic intent. What's our mission, vision, and values? Are we looking at our competition? Am I thinking about my competition from my own business unit perspective and the company, right? Am I thinking about those things and giving it due attention? Am I working with others across the organization to say, hey, this is right, this is what we're moving to and evolving to. Let's make sure we're staying lockstep. We're planning this really well together. And
Right.
then by the way, we're not taking our eye off the ball. We're still getting our short-term results.
Yeah.
Right. And that sounds like a pipe dream to a lot of people, I imagine, that you can actually help develop leaders so that they can have that type of recipe to follow. Sounds so simple, right?
For sure, for sure. And I mean, again, I don't want to, constantly be referencing back just to the sales organizations inside, that side of the corporate reality, but it is, a lion's share of my experience. And sales, let's just say, is not always necessarily the most touchy feely group within the organization, very numbers driven, as you suggested earlier. And but with that, talking about the risks, that's, with that, it carries risks. And the
Mm-hmm.
point that you were making about, thinking about, both the internal components and the external components are really kind of the whole ecosystem that is impacted by change, and by development, and the pace that it occurs at,
Mm-hmm.
is the right thing to do, right?
Right.
So thinking about our industry, how it moves, our primary competitors, how they move, our mission and goals and objectives of as an organization today, in the next 3 years and 10 years and 20 years, because it's not uncommon by any means that organizations have multi-decade plans,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about um, how development and change impacts not only the near term but the long term, and at what pace and scale is this
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem moving.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Pace is huge.
Yeah.
And many times, depending on who a company might be beholden to, right? What shareholders,
Hmm.
in some cases, we can get to jumping to those short-term gains really quickly over and over again and get into this pace, right? Where
Yep.
where we might be sitting pretty for the short term, but we're putting ourselves at risk because we don't have a good way to, like you said, actually operationalize some of those years long type of goals and
Hmm.
have planning that actually supports that. So that's one of the really beautiful things about Rejuvi's multidimensional model is it's actually gathering data points on that individual human. It's giving them a baseline, right, for their type of role. And what are those top 8 to 10 things that they really need to worry about? Leaders worry about 1,000 things a day, right? But
Right.
what are these 8 to 10 things to keep their eye on? And then what are the data points that come through that also help them see they're a little bit lighter over here, they're a little bit heavier over here, and some of those balanced business practices that can actually help organizations as they scale this type of multidimensional model and this type of data collection. They can actually start to see over time their company move mountains and do it in a really orchestrated way.
Hmm.
And that is new to the world.
Very true. Right. And having the real-time feedback immediately at their fingertips as well.
Right.
Right. You don't have to wait for the report to come out on that, right? To be collated and calculated and printed, so to speak.
Right. Yep. We're not, in this case, you're not waiting for HR, right? You have somebody who is in your own organization many times, who's been trained how to run these assessments and help leaders understand quickly what their baseline is, what this feedback is, what their starting point is. And I think the thing I love the most is leaders get to measure themselves again and again if they want to. The whole point of being leadership is a living journey. It's not a static thing. It's not a one-time program you put somebody through and you hope all the stuff sticks with them, and they
Right.
carry every single practice with them into the future. And by the way, they know exactly what order to do stuff in. I just think that's a lot to ask, right, of anybody. And so this idea that we can capture this data and leaders are really empowered to say, wow, if I'm focusing on these things and these are the practices and these are the behaviors, I just need to make sure that I'm demonstrating more and more frequently.
Hmm.
What that does is it's going to help the statistic that we keep hearing about. Almost 93% of leaders say they're not really equipped to do the jobs in front of them.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, going back to what we talked about at the top of our conversation around the risk being there's so much coming at leaders today. And, things like AI, which is a little bit of a shiny object, but a little bit of a reality, right? At the same time,
Hmm.
lots of us are trying to figure out how do we work with AI. Now I'm managing work that's actually done by AI, and I'm managing some human beings on my team. Like, that's new,
Yeah.
right? In addition to some of those other challenges. And so I can appreciate how disheartening sometimes leadership can feel to people, just really overwhelming about where do I start.
Right. Completely agree with that. And to your point, it is the inputs are only getting greater, right? And so thus it's only becoming more challenging, or more cloudy if you're left to try to figure it out on your own,
Mhm.
with just some foundational directives or foundational guidance from the organization, as opposed to that dynamic real-time um, approach,
Right.
right?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. The real-time approach, I think, is key. And I think in this world where there are a lot of uncertainties, um, that anytime we can help a leader have the confidence that they're leading with a rhythm, and it's a proven, right, it's a proven rhythm. It's based on what exceptional leaders look like. It's based on research that was done on these 8 to 10 things, right, to keep your eye on. Um, what that does is it helps bring stability into the business. When a leader feels like I know what I'm comparing myself to who I was yesterday, right, against this type of profile on these behaviors. And I know that I can watch that needle move through my intentional actions, my intentional growth. That is going to bring some stability into the workforce, right, and into the workplace, and help leaders and teams actually work together in maybe a more egalitarian way than has ever been done.
Yeah. I think that's well put.
Well, thank you, sir. So Scott, you've like I said, you've been with us for just a very short time. I would just love to kind of close out with you talking a little bit about what brought you to Rejuvi.
Certainly happy to do so. I mean, there are really two. I can kind of boil it down or summarize it into two key perspectives, and one of which we've been talking about most, and I think is at the forefront of Rejuvi's mission, right? And that's that multidimensional real-time capability to integrate individual growth with corporate objective, right?
Mhm.
And keeping it in lockstep, and again, real time, and being able to develop or provide guidance for that individual leader, really at every step of the way. So as they're developing and evolving, that assessment is continuing to fine tune itself to here's where and how you need to continue focusing. So that again, kind of the obvious component, I think. But um, for me, the other really intriguing thing you touched on a little bit too is, you mentioned AI being the shiny object, and my background experience definitely have some time spent in that space, and so many there's so much change and evolution going on there. You talked about, I mean, like, we you could create the basis of these discussions or these conversations by asking ChatGPT or Perplexity or Google or Siri to give you some ideas to start from, right? And we kind of live in that world today. But the other reality is, within organizations, you're now going to have digital team members. You may have, chatbots that have fantastic input from their experience in interfacing with clients, customers, whomever, with employees, and other types of digital assets, or at a minimum, what I would call digitally driven processes. Look at automations throughout the organizations and things of that nature that are helping drive and deliver results. And interestingly enough, have caused a lot of kerfluffle and scare within the company ranks, right? Of am I getting replaced by you look at finance departments wondering if they're getting replaced by robots or automation, and really that's not the case. Now, we can always create a scenario where there's a realistic concern that AI takes over the world or AI takes over the company. But let's back away from the kind of fringe extreme scenarios and look at what's really happening. They're delivering, they're taking away some of that boring work, mundane work, routine work, but they're still that it's still necessary for the team or the organization. And so for me, that's the other really intriguing thing, and maybe a little bit less obvious, is looking at how these digital assets or these digital results and outputs are actually being integrated into the management of an operational unit, right? Or a business unit, and how they are a a force multiplier for the results of that group or that team. And that impacts obviously impacts the leader and how they're handling that reality across their team. So that's the other thing that was really intriguing to me, where I think we're going to continue to see this more and more as a necessity of development across the organization, and certainly development of the leadership core. And when you look at corporate, taking that one more layer, a large percentage of C-level C-level individuals within the organization are learning this later in their career, as learning about this later in their career as well. So there's a lot of opportunity from the top down, to a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential impact for for Rejuvi to help organizations grow.
100%. We're so glad you're here. And, I have to say, I love that you've got this background in automation and AI. I think you're going to, help us think differently and go further faster here at Rejuvi. But I also think you're in that unique position as you're talking to individuals who are wondering about Rejuvi and what it can do for their business. One of the things that you said that I really loved is, the whole purpose of these emerging technologies is to free up humans to do the stuff that's really human, and as much as possible. And, the humans got to stick together. And this idea of being able to provide real-time data to a leader, really within, boy, I mean, it takes less than 12 minutes for somebody to complete the multi-rater assessment really quickly. But the intent too is like, let's just get rid of all the other noise, right? The complexity and the noise and the mystery. Let's get down into what's the right rhythm for how I'm showing up and operating. because that rhythm again is going to bring stability. It's going to help eliminate some of the risks of how we have done things in the past, which is we've tried to piecemeal it as best we can. We've tried to guess what order to help people. And the reality is the world is turning too fast for us to continue down that path. And, kind of the old way of developing people. It's time for an integrated way. It's time for a data-driven way to help our leaders be successful. So,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
So listen, I've loved having you as a guest here and a partner with us here at Rejuvi, partner in crime for sure. And we are going to continue our conversations. We have, for those of you who are watching, whether with us now or watching after the fact when you get a little bit of time, please tune in. We're going to be here again next week, Thursday. We're here on Thursdays with Rejuvi 45. The next topic is going to be called At the Table, and we will be on between 2 and 2:45 p.m., and that is Eastern Standard Time. So with that, I will bid you a good day, Scott, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mel. It's been a pleasure.
All right.